Okay, Shalom Aleichem, how you doing?
Hi,
Good to see you in a while.
yes,
Yeah.
yes, Rabbi, I have a few big questions to you. I have a friend who is actually a very smart guy. He recently finished his PhD in solar panel physics. And what is interesting about him is he studied for a few months in yeshiva in Berlin, and then he was religious for a few years. And then he told me that one day he asked himself, what is he doing? And he could not find a proper answer to this question, and after that he became not religious. But it's also interesting, he's willing to discuss these religious topics and spend maybe hours discussing all these things, and I could not convince him that Judaism, Orthodox Judaism, is the right path. So he asked me questions which we discussed the questions which is discussed also in the literature, but all kind of standard answers that could be given, they can be still invalidated, disproved. So maybe you can give some other answers to comparing to what I could find so far. So question is like this: that Jewish religion, unlike other religions, are based on revelation at Sinai. So all other religions are started some one person experienced something, prophecy or whatever, and he told some other people and other people and other people, and they all just it grew like that. And Judaism is based on revelation at Sinai, which was witnessed by an entire nation, 3 million people or whatever. But what is interesting about it is that you know about it only from Torah, and there are no other sources, non-Jewish sources, even though it is claimed to be one of the biggest events in the entire world at that time. So you cannot find you cannot trace any other sources to that. So one of standard answers to this question is that you cannot, so at a certain moment, let's say a certain generation knew about something, and it was passed from one generation to another generation. You cannot, at a certain point, let's say this event would be falsified. We want to falsify this event.
Oh, you're shifting ground now. You're starting off by saying no other sources exist. Mm-hmm. Is that the question?
Yeah, maybe you can say that there are. Maybe I can write them down.
No, but that's not the only possible answer. But now, when you talk about making it up at a later time, that's a different question.
Okay.
The answer is this. Whenever you want to base an argument on, we didn't find X, whether it's archaeology or anything else, you want to say, we didn't find X, so ABC. You need an extra premise. And the premise is, we should have found it. We should have found it, and we didn't find it. You need a positive reason for thinking that you should have found it. Only then can not finding it be a relevant fact. If you cannot supply the extra premise why you should have found it, then the fact that you didn't find it is utterly insignificant. You can't base anything on it. So whenever anybody says, I didn't find X, you should stop him and say, what made you think that you should have found it? Now, let's take the revelation at Sinai. You ask, why don't other nations have a record of our revelation at Sinai? I ask, what makes you think they should have such a record? Here's something that would be relevant, it just isn't true. Did other nations at that time have descriptions of other people's religions? Did the Babylonians have a description of Egyptian religion? Did the Egyptians have a description of Assyrian religion? Did the Persians have a description of Babylonian religion? Did any country have a description of somebody else's religion? The answer is no. No one at that time had any information about religions other than their own. So I wouldn't expect to find a mention of the revelation at Sinai in any other culture. So the fact that you don't find it is utterly insignificant. Nothing can be based on that. That's exactly what you would expect. No culture recorded the religion of another culture. So it's a non-relevant fact. It's not an argument for anything. It's not an argument against anything. It's just a fact about ancient history that cultures did not record the religion of other cultures. So if that's an argument that he's using, it's a non-argument. It's a non-starter. There's no weight whatsoever.
Well, besides the fact of Revelation 9 and so on, there are many wars were carried out in relation to it. Including land of Israel, war with Amalek, war with Egypt.
The same answer is it's exactly the same answer. No country recorded its own defeats. Never did they write that they lost a war. So we don't expect to find records of those people who lost the wars against us. We don't expect to find that. By the way, we do find records of those who won wars against us. We do find that. Shangri wrote memoirs of the wars that he won against us. Egypt has a record of a campaign that they made against us. They find records where they won. We don't find any records where anybody lost a war. So again, I'm repeating the logic because the logic is universal. Whenever somebody wants to say, I didn't find X, therefore, you should stop him and say, wait a minute, before you draw your therefore, tell me why you would have expected to find X. If there are no records like that at all in the whole historical period, then of course you didn't find it. You didn't find it because nobody made records like that. And therefore not finding it can teach you nothing.
Thank you. Very clear.
Okay, good. That's one. And then you started to describe another thing, and I'll just answer this and we'll go on to other people. This is another, I suppose I have to take some responsibility for this, even though I wrote it clearly. I presented an argument, and I wanted to make the argument easy to understand. So I presented a sort of intuition behind the argument, and most people got tired by reading 10 or 12 pages, and they thought that was the argument. That's not the argument at all. The argument is not the intuition. The argument is something else entirely, and they don't get to the end. So I say, it's a story that couldn't be made up. Clever people say, I don't agree with you. I think it could be made up. I can give you a dozen scenarios how it could be made up, or how it could come into existence without being true. I agree with that. I agree with that. The idea that it couldn't be made up is not the argument. I don't base anything on that. I'm stressing this because many people I've answered at least an infinity of emails, maybe 2 infinities of emails getting this wrong. I don't base anything on the idea that it couldn't be made up. Nothing is based on that. If that's what his objection is, he hasn't understood the argument. The argument is based on an empirical survey that there are no such failed traditions anywhere in human history. It's an empirical survey. It's facts about real cultures' histories. It has nothing to do with whether it could be made up or couldn't be made up. The fact is, people don't make up things like that. They don't. That's a fact about history. And if they don't make up things like that, to say ours is made up would be to say, this is the only case in all of human history where such a story was made up. That's very unlikely. It's very poor. It's very improbable. If all human history, all human experience shows that stories like this don't get made up, then to say nowhere, no one, not the Eskimos and not the Chinese, not the Nigerians, not the South Africans, and not the Germans, and not not people in Los Angeles, nobody made up such stories. The only people who ever did it in all history is the Jewish people. That's very improbable. So the person who says that is desperate. He's not basing himself on evidence, not basing himself on logic. He's just saying, I don't want to accept it, so I say it was made up. If you don't have any empirical evidence that stories like that are made up, then you have no reason to think that this one is made up. People always think up ways it could have happened. I agree it could have happened. I give that away at the outset. Anything could have happened. Leprechauns could be true also. Anything could be true. My question is, what evidence do you have that it's really true? Not could be true, but it's really true. And the critic cannot point to a single example of a story like ours that is really made up. If that's the case, he's just grasping at straws. He's just saying it was made up because he doesn't want to accept the conclusion, but he has no evidence, no reason, and no probability in favor of his position. Now that's actually in the book that I wrote, and it's in the articles that I wrote, but it's towards the end. is towards the end, and I say it explicitly. I say, why should you accept this? Not because of the intuition, but because of an empirical survey that real cultures didn't make this kind of mistake. And no one has ever provided a real example. You tell your friend, find a real example.
What is the book, name of the book?
Living Up to the Truth. It's on my website. You can download straight away. I have a much, much larger version, which I haven't yet published, but I can share it with people who want it. On my website, there's a tab called Miscellaneous, and there's a thing called Introduction to the Kuzari Principle. I think it's the first article under that tab, which could be read about the nature of memory. At any rate, the critic always says, I can imagine using drugs, I can imagine a wicked king, I can imagine myths changing over time, and it's all imagination. All the objections are imagination. Imagination doesn't count. You have a good imagination, write a novel and sell it. I'm not talking about what you can imagine, I'm talking about what happens in the real world. There isn't a single case of a culture accepting a story about a national event that's turned out to be not true.
Should we discuss such? I discussed such well, maybe similar event with other rabbis. So you take a story of Shangri or Samarites. So what they claim that revelation at Sinai happened to them, that they have their own version of Torah, which is a little bit different from Jewish Torah, from our Torah, and they have books of Nevi'im, or only Yeshua, but it's also a little bit different. And they claim that everything happened to them, but not to Jews.
They don't say it didn't happen to Jews. They said it happened to them. And it did happen to them. They were part of the Jewish people, and then they separated.
Well, according to some other sources, let's say, what we read in the Mishnah, I think was Rabban Gamliel, Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel, they considered them as normal as kosher Jews, and afterwards in the Halacha now is that they are not Jews. Shangri now not Jews, and they there is opinion about them that they were brought by.
Okay, but what has this got to do with anything? The fact is that they were a part of the Jewish people, and they were there until after the time of Joshua, and then they separated. When they say it happened to their ancestors, it's true. It did happen to their ancestors. I mean, that's one way to look at it, right? And they just separated out, and then they didn't accept the rest of the tradition. Indeed, the Shomronim are a big problem for the critics, because they say that Deuteronomy was written much, much later in our history, after the books of Kings were written, and after King David and all the rest. That's when Deuteronomy was written. And they have Deuteronomy, and they have Joshua, and nothing else. The critics can't explain why, if they have Deuteronomy, which came much later, why they don't have the books in between. Showmanim are a problem for them. Anyway, I'm just telling you that people are making a mistake about thinking that the argument is on the basis of intuition. It's not on the basis of intuition. Thinking up possible counterexamples is irrelevant. You have to find real cases in real human history. And that's written in the chapter. It's written in the chapter. It's right there, but people don't read all the way to the end and then make up their minds after the first 5 pages.
Sorry, I didn't read the book. So
okay. So then if he's asking about that, you should really look up. Okay, but let's go on to somebody else. We really have to give somebody else a chance. So,
have one more question still about Shmonim, or you want to?
Let's go on to somebody else, because it's already 20 minutes out of that. Yeah.
Sometimes, unfortunately, it happens that you find people in positions of power or influence, for example, the bank, who sometimes have their faults, and they speak Russian horror, or you hear them as curse or something like that. Does that disqualify them from you being able to either choose them as a rabbi or learn from them, or should we hold them to a higher standard because they're teacher, or should we just admit that this is their faults, and they have faults just like every human?
Well, I don't know. The way you started off, you made it sound as if it was either or, and you put the question in absolute terms. A person can teach me if he knows more than I do. A person can inspire me if he's better than I am. Even if he's better than I am in one particular area, he can inspire me in that one particular area. He doesn't have to be better than me than everything. I happen to be a musician. I would not require that the person who's going to be my Rabbi be a musician. I'm trained in mathematical logic. I would not require that a person who's going to be a Rebbe of mine should know mathematical logic as well as I do. I don't want inspiration in that area from him. And as my Rabbi told me, Zatzal, 40 years ago, we've reached the age of specialization. There may be one person who can teach you and inspire you how to pray, another person who can teach you and inspire you how to learn, another person who can teach you and inspire you how to be interpersonally sensitive and kind and supportive of another person. Then you take the person as your teacher in the area that he's superior to you, and he can give you guidance and inspiration. When you find a person who has faults, well, welcome to the club. Moses had faults, the King David had faults, Abraham had faults, everybody had faults. So if I'm going to look at a person and say, oh, he has that fault, so therefore he can't be my teacher, it's going to be very difficult to find a teacher. Yes, the Gemara says that you shouldn't have a teacher unless he's like a malach, unless he's like an angel, but like has to be taken there with quite quite flexibly. Otherwise, no one will be able to teach anybody. Now, it might disturb you that the person has a particular type of fault and make it hard for you to relate to him. That will be a serious problem. You have to be really able to relate with confidence, with respect, with a certain amount of maybe even awe for the person, to able to receive the teaching of Torah. We're not talking about mathematics now. We're talking about Torah. But to demand perfection, it's ridiculous. No, perfection is found in only one place. That's in God. It's not found in any human being. So there are going to be the failures everywhere. I don't think you can have a criterion that the person who you accept as a teacher should. Now, there are ways to deal with this. The Shulchan Aruch talks about how you confront someone, even a teacher, who's done something which you think is wrong. Like you do with your parents and with your teachers, you say, it seems to me that I learned X, Y, Z. Am I correct in thinking that that is the way the halacha goes? It's one way to do it. Another way to do it, and of course this should be done in private, it should never be done in public. You can say to the person, I seem to see you doing ABC. You're a teacher of mine. I'm inclined to say, if you're doing it, it must be right. Shall I take it that way? Therefore, that way you give him the opportunity to say, no, you caught me in a weakness, it's a weak thing that I do, and no, you shouldn't take that as something that is really correct. There are ways to handle this in a sensitive fashion. By the way, if a person is doing something wrong, and he is rebuked, and he continues to do that wrong thing, then he is placed in a category of people who are much more criminal. Okay? Chazon Ish said, no one qualifies for that category in our times because no one knows how to properly give rebuke. That only applies when rebuke is given properly. And no one in our times knows how to properly give rebuke. So that means the person was never approached and confronted in a way which could be expected that should set him straight in what he's doing. So we live with weaknesses all around us. And that being the case, if you approach the person with sensitivity, but as I say, if it bothers you, if you can't take it, that's a perfectly good reason to say I have to look someplace else. You know, I have to have somebody that I feel that I can trust, that I feel that I can learn from, that I feel can inspire me, and I with someone like this, I just can't do it.
Okay,
Yeah.
So let's say let's say there's a non-Jewish person who's a suicide bomber. Like, all right, it could be the Arabs, whatever. But so is he considered like a sinner? And like, well, can you answer that question first?
Yeah, you know, you're asking a good question, and it's quite a sensitive question, and I think that people are not prepared to hear what one has to say about this. But I'll tell you, because you asked it, because I trust you. Rav Dessler has an article on free will where he says, imagine a child who is born into and brought up in a community of thieves in the mountains. The whole community is the community of thieves. And he is taught that thieving is right, thieving is good. To the strong belong the spoils. And he never heard any dissenting opinion. Says Rav Dessler, he has no free will on stealing, and he has no responsibility for stealing. Now, Rav Dessler's example is quite striking because stealing is something we regard as against logic. What Rav Dessler is telling us is that a whole community that has a perverted idea can destroy your logic. Can destroy your logic. So I think that probably applies to some of these suicide bombers. They're brought up in a circumstance, well, okay, maybe they hear that Jews think differently, but they are trained to think that Jews are not a source. I would not hold an American Jew responsible for not keeping Shabbos on the grounds that he's read in the New York Times that Orthodox Jews, those prejudiced ignoramuses from the Middle Ages, have Sabbath restrictions. He looks at the Orthodox Jews like you look at Zulus. Okay, so the Zulus do that. What's that to me? That's nothing to do with me. And that being the case, I think that there will be suicide bombers who are not responsible for what they do. The ones who are responsible are the ones who know better, who are manipulating them. Sometimes they feed them drugs. They've documented that Daesh feeds people drugs before they send them into battle, so they won't be afraid to die. And those people who are manipulating them may be responsible. But the people who actually blow themselves up might very well be responsible. Now, that's not all of them. The guys who were flying airplanes into the Twin Towers, they were Western. They read English. So I don't know where they draw the line. But there definitely is a position where a person's fed a certain line of falsehoods, and that takes away his responsibility. Yes, that does happen.
So if that's the case, it can also be applied that where if people have different belief systems, right? So in the sense that unless someone's actually really believes in truth, Torah,
Yeah.
they can't almost if everyone does the morally correct thing based on their own belief system, can there really be called doing an avera or being held responsible for it?
Oh yes, because listen to the condition that I made. I made the condition that they have never heard the truth,
Yeah.
or they've been trained to think that anybody who disagrees is not competent. They're just not civilized, or not fully human, or not competent. But that's not always the case. There's a big debate in the United States about abortion. Most people realize that there are honest people on both sides, intelligent people on both sides, sensitive people on both sides, and they have to admit that although I'm convinced this side is right, I can't deny that there is another side that intelligent people believe in.
Right.
If so, then the person can be held responsible. More than that, Rav Wasserman says this. I'm going to teach you a technique now. This is a very, very important technique. It has many, many applications. When a person takes a position, there are two ways you can attack him. One way is you can say, look at all these facts, look at all this experience which is against you. The other way is you can check his internal consistency. You could say, okay, that's how you're reasoning about this, but how come about that you reason in a very different way? Holocaust denial. You say, but they're all the gas chambers, and the Germans admitted it, and so forth and so on. They're lying. They had to admit it because they lost the war, and so forth and so on. Ask them, okay, I hear your position. There was no Holocaust, right? Was there an American Civil War? American Civil War. Was there? Now, if this is going on in public, he'd better say yes. Because if he says no, he's out, right? He says, okay, so why is it that you think you have more evidence for the American Civil War in 1860 to 1865 than you have for the Holocaust from 1939 to 1945? Do you think people walked on the moon? Maybe it was a Hollywood gimmick to sell American technology. Hollywood could easily stage something like that. Why do you think your evidence for men walking on the moon is better than your evidence for the Holocaust? So you're attacking him with internal consistency. Now you take this person who doesn't believe in the Torah. You say to him, how do you make up your mind on economics? How do you make up your mind on macrobiotic diets? How do you make up your mind on politics? Do you read both sides of the issue? Do you discuss and debate? Do you get reasons to change your mind from time to time? You do? That's how you approach issues of importance and significance. Did you do that with Judaism? Did you read both sides of the issue? Did you discuss the issue with various people? Did you trade ideas? Did you ever change your mind? No? Well, then it seems to me you didn't give Judaism a fair chance. That's not reasonable. And you can be held responsible for that.
Why would they think they should give Judaism a fair chance?
Because there are professors of philosophy who believe in Judaism, and there are professors of physics who believe in Judaism, and there are professors of mathematics who believe in Judaism, and there are explorers who believe in Judaism, and experimental scientists, and business tycoons, and so forth and so on. So Are they going to just assume that all of those people are incompetent?
I mean, but just as every other religion, there's
Indeed.
right.
Indeed.
Always. So like every other religion can have that argument about me, saying, "Yo, you haven't adequately looked into my religion," you know. So like, you're saying that I should go around and look at every other religion?
No, it only works if it's in fact true.
Right.
You don't
but,
have to check every false thing.
I don't like maybe like they say they have the truth. I haven't looked into it.
I know.
So how can
So
I'm ignorant in it. You know?
Okay, but I'm telling you, this is only a complaint against someone who ends up believing something false. It's no complaint against the person who ends up believing something true. The person goes to a doctor. Have you investigated voodoo medicine in the South Sea Islands? No? Does that mean that you're making a mistake in going to a Western doctor? No, it does not. If you go to the voodoo doctor, then you can be convicted of making a mistake. Here, I've done it because I was born outside. I was raised outside, and I did check all the world's religions. And I did analyze them and investigate them. So, but I had to do it because otherwise I couldn't have made up my mind what's correct.
Right.
No one has enough time in life to check all possibilities on all questions. Do you know how electricity works? I'll bet you don't. And I bet you don't know the quantum mechanics of electricity. So you don't have how do you turn on a light switch if you don't know how electricity works? There isn't enough time to check everything in the world.
Agreed. So like for non-Jewish people, they think that they've come to a correct like decision. Like so, the best.
No, they don't. No, they don't. Listen to what I said. I said, ask the person, how do you make up your mind on economics? You weigh both sides, you discuss and debate with people. How do you make up your mind on politics? You read issues, people who are arguing on both sides, and you discuss, you debate, you make up your mind, right? You discuss and debate and read both sides, and you make up your mind. Now, did you do that with respect to religion? They didn't do that. So they can't say, I think I have a right view, because they didn't discuss and debate and analyze it the way they do everything else that they themselves investigate. They themselves hold as important. So they themselves are internally inconsistent.
But you talk now about atheism, like you say religion, so it's religion versus non-religion then.
Or religion versus other religions. Could be either way.
Some people don't think religion is that important.
Good. So then I say, okay, does it, if it were true, would it make a difference? Ask a Jew, or a Christian or Muslim or anybody. If you stood at Sinai and heard God speak, would that change your plans for the weekend?
Yeah.
Then it is important, isn't it? You yourself are admitting that it's
Well,
important.
But not that it's important, like based on their beliefs. Like some people say, like, oh, I feel like each one's a variation of like the actual truth.
Good.
So like they're thinking, all right, so it doesn't matter if I'm Christian or Jewish or whatever, as long as I like do what I feel.
Good, but
is
did they
right.
read about that question? Or they just think it over coffee and that was enough? Did they take the attitude towards that question that they took towards economics? Did they take the attitude towards health?
Let's say no.
Okay, so then they can't say, I've come to a conclusion about this. What they can say is, I have a prejudice about this.
Right, and so up until that point, they're still making the best choice they can make.
Why?
Because
They wouldn't do that in economics.
Well,
They wouldn't do it in politics. They wouldn't do it in their diet. So why is that the best choice here?
I mean, they should look into it, but like until like, all right, so someone comes about tshuva, like when he's 30, he didn't know any better before 30.
Right.
So you can't count him accountable until he turns to until he finds out the truth. If he doesn't know he's not doing anything wrong, you can't like argue.
Sure you can. It depends upon why he doesn't know. You know, when you make statements like this, my suggestion is always take it out of religion and talk about not knowing how a car works, or not knowing what a doctor is, or not knowing where to get the mail, or so, talk about that. And say, oh, you know why I didn't see your email? Because I didn't think it was important to look at the email. 1 second. Right? You say, what do you mean you didn't think it was important? I send you emails. I expect you to read them. I needed your help. What do you mean you didn't think it was important? When you take it out of the realm of religion, where it's very emotional and very built up with prejudice, and talk about regular. I left my dog in your care. I went to the Bahamas for a month. The dog got sick. Did you go to a doctor? I didn't think it was important. I'm going to be very angry. You have care for my dog, and you didn't think it was important. So now God's going to say, I revealed my Sabbath to you, and you didn't think it was important to check? You didn't think it was important. How could you not think it was important? You know very well if you had been there, you'd have been required to keep it. And now there's a record of it having happened. You didn't bother to check it out. Then you can be held responsible for that. Indeed, if something isn't important, like whether Pluto really should be a planet or whether it should be a dwarf planet, as it was demoted 3 years ago, okay, doesn't make any difference one way or the other. But Shabbos is every week. And if you really are required to keep it, every Saturday you're doing something wrong. Yeah.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you to further elaborate on what I think he said, which is like, they can also ask the question to you, like, have you checked out both sides of other religions? And if you just respond rationally to that question, what should be your response to them? Like a rational answer, not. I almost feel if you say like, yeah, but this is the truth, then maybe it will not be satisfying for them.
Yeah. Well, for me, it's easy because I did. I actually did read of the world's 8 major religions. I read their own people, their own philosophers, their own theologians. I read them and I analyzed them and I classified them and I've written about it. So I have actually done that.
So I would then refer to you maybe. I say, yeah, but I know somebody who's done it and he came to this conclusion.
As you would with electricity, as you would with democracy. You know, most Americans will tell you democracy is the be-all and end-all of the world. It's the absolute truth, right? I can tie a person up in knots in democracy like that because I'm a philosopher. He hasn't thought about it. Suppose everybody votes to install a dictator. Does democracy allow that or not? You don't know. You haven't got a clue, right? Oh, you believe in democracy. Democracy is so important. And the first elementary question, I can make it in 10 words, and nobody's thought about it. So I say, well, look, the people who are doing the best in the world believe in democracy. That's why I believe in it. The other people are suffering and so forth. So I don't have to go through all the theory. I see the results. I see that Judaism has survived, whereas every other culture has disintegrated and disappeared, including Christianity. Read what the Protestants write about the Catholics, how they falsified the message of the founder of Christianity. Every group in Christianity says every other group falsified the message, which means no one has a clue what he originally said, and everybody says that almost everybody else has falsified the message. All of it's gone to pieces. We know what Moses said. We know what Moses wrote. It was long before Christianity. So we have objective facts on our side, which no other nation can claim.
What about Muslims? It's also disintegrating Islam?
Well, you have Sunni and Shiites,
Okay.
and then you have the ones who are committed to the religion to the end, and those who aren't committed to the religion to the end. They have this gigantic disagreement about what Muhammad taught, what Muhammad really meant. So the original, it's very difficult to tell what the original was if there was an original. Yeah.
Switching a little bit, if that's okay, different type of question. What am I in the eyes of God? Like I heard today that we're just Hashem's thought from the second, if he would stop thinking about us, then we would just cease to exist. And that kind of give me a feeling of like worthlessness, that like, what does that mean? What am I, if I believe in God fully, then what does that mean? What does God see me as? What am I doing for him then?
Okay, that's a subtle question, and it's true that one sort of analogy that people make does have that implication. One analogy that they make is, we are like God's dream.
Right, that's what I heard today.
Oh, good. So in other words, and if you wake up, all the characters in your dream disappear.
Right.
Because they are dependent upon you. Now let me shift the analogy a little bit. You have a fluorescent light bulb, okay? It shines because electricity is passing through it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now suppose I own the generator.
Okay.
So I'm supplying electricity for the light to keep shining. So there is a light, but without my electricity, it'll be dark.
Okay.
It shines only because I keep pumping electricity through it. So the light coming out of the light bulb is because I push electricity through it. Okay?
Okay.
So God is, so to speak, pushing energy through us so that we can continue to exist. Now, the second step, that pretty much confirms what you said, that I'm just an offshoot. But God gave us, and only us, nothing else in creation has this, at least to any extent, gave us the ability to act independently. He gave us free will so that we can act independently. That's what gives us our special importance, above and beyond everything else. A squirrel would have to be swallowed up by your picture. Just a throw-off. I'm just a throw-off. That's all a squirrel is just a throw-off. An angel, 99% is just a throw-off. human beings are the only ones that have any kind of independence. In that respect, I'm quoting now Luzzatto in The Way of God, chapter 2. In that respect, only human beings are similar to God in the crucial respect of being self-determined in any way whatsoever. Squirrels have no self-determination. Angels have almost no self-determination because they don't have free will. Free will is precisely free, and free will means free from divine causation, free from being caused by God. Free will means a will by which I make my decisions which isn't caused by God. That means when I make a free will decision, I'm the one who's making it, and that's why it has importance. That's why it has significance. That's why it has value. And that part doesn't fit the picture you started with, because that part, God supports in us that ability to make free decisions.
That being said, why does God need us?
There are people who are disturbed by the idea that God might need us, because their thought is, if A needs B, then A depends upon B. A can't function without B. A is not complete.
I'm saying the opposite of that. I don't agree with that. I believe that Hashem does not need it.
I understand,
Which
but
is
the one.
why I don't know why we're like he doesn't.
So, okay, but what's leading you down that path is the thought that if I admit that God needs us, then God won't be perfect. God won't be self-contained, self-defined,
Okay.
right? I think that's a mistake. I think that's a mistake. The original move is a mistake. To think that A needs B implies that A is dependent upon B. That might not be correct. Isn't it possible that A needs B and A can provide B for himself all by himself?
Yeah, but I don't think A does need B.
I think I'm trying to explain to you why you think that.
Okay.
I'm reading your mind.
Okay.
You think that God doesn't need us because you're afraid that if you say God does need us, that's going to mean that he isn't perfect. A perfect being shouldn't need anything other than himself. That's what's leading you to think that. Otherwise, I don't see why should you think that. Okay, but I'm trying to show you that to say that A needs B doesn't imply that A is less than perfect. Because it might happen that A needs B, but A can provide B for himself without any help from the outside. And then that need will not mean that he's less than perfect. Let's suppose that I need music. I need music or I can't go on. I need music or I'm just going to deteriorate, right?
Okay.
But I sing. And in fact, I sing beautifully. And I sing to myself, and that's how I get the music that I need. I'm not dependent upon anything, not dependent on anyone. I'm totally self-sufficient. Am I less than perfect because I need music?
No.
I don't think so. So I don't think there's any push to deny that God needs us. If God needs us, whatever we have to do, but he can guarantee on his own, without any help from the outside, that it's going to work out in the end, then that means he's not less than perfect. That's one way out. It's questioning an unspoken premise in the argument that if A needs B, then A can't be perfect. I'm saying that that's not correct. If A needs B, but A can supply B for himself as well, God creates us without any help from anything on the outside.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? Now, there's another way out. It's related, but it's a little bit different. The word need is ambiguous. Let's think about things that I want to do. Lots and lots of things that I want to do. Some of the things I want to do have as their goal something good for me. If I'm doing A to get B for myself, that means right now I don't have B for myself. And if I'm doing it to get B for myself, presumably good is B for me. B is good for me. And if B is good for me and I don't have it, then I'm missing something. Sometimes I do something, I do A for the sake of B, and B is for somebody else, it's not for me. I don't do everything for myself. I do some things for myself and do some things for other people. If I'm doing B for somebody else, you can say I need to do B. You could say I need money to do B. You could say I need energy to do B. But B isn't for me, it's for somebody else. That need is only to provide for somebody else. The need to provide for somebody else doesn't make me less than perfect. Indeed, one aspect of perfection is goodness. And goodness in practice is better than just goodness in potentiality. A human being who's kind and sensitive, marooned on a South Sea island, alone with nobody else around, is good in potential. Someone who's living in Manhattan and does acts of kindness to other people in Manhattan is good in actuality, not just in potential. Goodness in actuality is better than just goodness in potential. So a being that's perfect, which means a being that's supremely good, will be giving to others because he's perfect. Now if you say, well then, he needs the others to give to, sure, but his needing them is an expression of his perfection. Without the others, he couldn't be perfectly good. He couldn't be perfectly good because his goodness would be inferior. It would only be a potential, it wouldn't be an actuality. So when you say he needs it, he doesn't need it for himself, he needs it for what he can do for others. That need also doesn't take away from perfection. So there's two ways to acknowledge that God needs us. Yes, he does. He does need it, but it does not touch his perfection at all. Yeah.
I have a question off of his though. So just following this, didn't he create the concept of giving in the first place?
Yeah.
So why would he create the concept of giving? Like I can follow this just like a level deeper and try to go all the way down. Okay, I'll link that to the side. But fine. So why did he create the concept of giving?
You mean create it so that human beings can understand it? Is that what you mean?
I mean, no. Like he said, he's good. So because like.
What defines perfect?
No. Let him ask.
He's good. So and part of being good is that you give to other people.
Right.
So he created the other person to give to, right?
Right.
So didn't God perceive everything, including like concepts themselves? Like, didn't he make the concept of good?
Yes.
So why did he define the concept of good that he needs to give to someone? Why do you create giving in the first place? Like,
well, those are not the same question.
no, you're right.
I mean, why did he define the concept of good? That means to. I mean, otherwise it wouldn't be the concept of good. Why did they define the concept of chess that it isn't chicken soup? Because it wouldn't be chess. It would be chicken soup.
Okay.
I mean, concepts have a definition.
Okay, it's good. It's okay. It's not our version of good. It's a good like apostrophe, whatever. It's a different type of good.
Why call it good? Why not just call it chicken soup?
All right, you could, but like I'm just asking.
But then you're not asking a question.
Why did he create? Why did he create standards for himself to live up to?
I didn't say anything about creating standards for himself.
Well, yeah, because
I said perfection has this as an implication.
He created the concept of perfection. If the concept of perfection was killing people, then he would create people.
Let's understand. I don't know if you mean what you're saying. A person comes to America.
Yeah.
He's never seen tables before.
Yeah.
Never seen them before.
Okay.
Doesn't know what they are.
Yeah.
Indeed, he sees this one standing here. Maybe the next thing is a piece of wood that sits flat on the floor. And maybe it's one that hangs on the wall. He doesn't know how to concept. So I said, listen, there's a concept here. There's a concept of table. The concept of table applies to things that stand off the ground, that can hold things and so forth and so on, right? He doesn't have the concept. That's not creating tables. That's creating the concept of table.
Right.
It's not creating the reality. It's creating the mental concept. Well, of course, we couldn't think if we didn't have concepts. So God created us in a way that we can understand concepts. He created concepts. That's not creating the reality. That's not creating goodness. That's creating the thought of goodness. Thoughts are necessary to grasp reality. A person who comes from a culture with no tables, he comes here, I don't need to create tables for him. I need to create a concept for him to think about the tables that are here. The table's reality doesn't depend upon his concepts. Goodness is a thing. We need the concept to think about it. We didn't have that concept, like dogs don't have the concept, then we couldn't think about it.
Does goodness exist?
If
goodness exists separate to God? Is that like...
No, but why are you focusing on the concept? Concept's a piece of mental equipment, that's all.
So like, what is goodness? What's the answer? Like, I think goodness itself is a concept. Like a table is something physical.
No, goodness is not a concept. Goodness is a reality in the world. When people give something to somebody else, that's goodness in the world. A concept is something, what I have in my mind, just like numbers, in a certain way, you have concepts of numbers, right? Yeah. With no people in the world, with no concepts at all, still, there's a certain number of planets, a certain number of grains of sand. The numbers are a real piece of the furniture of the world. Concepts are just my mental equipment to think about the world.
Okay, Okay, fine. So it doesn't matter if it's concepts or not. Whatever goodness is, concept or reality or whatever,
Yeah.
God created it. So, like, and by creating it, he has to he defines himself as good, right? So he has to like.
He defines himself. That's what his reality is. Not as if he has a dictionary and he says, under God I put good, and then we had learned the dictionary because he put
Are
those
God
words
and good
together.
The same thing, or can you separate them?
Sorry?
Are God and good the same thing, or can you separate them? Like, did God create good, or God is good? Like that's the same thing as God.
God is what he is, and given what goodness is, it is an essential feature of God that he's good.
But can you separate the goodness from God? Like,
I know what separate means. Put one in New York and one in New Jersey? You mean imagine God not being good? No, that you cannot do. God is necessarily good. It's not accidentally good.
what's making God good? Like, I don't.
What makes a square have four sides?
Like
Because that's what a square is.
So that's his definition. God is good. That's his definition.
No, it's not a definition. It's not a
It's
definition.
just like a square. It's like four sides. Fine, sorry, I didn't mean to.
It's simply what God is. I don't know what else to say.
So that's-
You know, it's not. When you say it's a definition, it sounds arbitrary. You can define things as you like. It's not a question of arbitrarily using words, making up a code. You're talking about a reality. God is perfect, and perfection includes goodness, the greatest possible measure of goodness. That's part of what perfection is. Right? Without concepts, it would still be true. If there were no people and no concepts whatsoever, there would still be planets, there would still be galaxies, there would still be space and time. It isn't concepts that make the world. Concepts enable me to think about the world. They don't make the world. If God gave us concepts to think with, that's because he wants us to be able to think.
Give me I'll think about this in the meantime.
Okay.
Are you trying to ask, did God create the reality of good?
Well, God created a universe, and that universe has certain features. You could create a universe with no goodness in it at all. Just create a universe of particles.
So
Never
why
conglomerate into anything other than particles. Then there wouldn't be any goodness or evil in it.
So why?
Just be neutral.
Right. So why do you create a reality good over reality of nothing?
Because he's perfect, and perfect requires the greatest level of goodness. And goodness means that you have to give. Goodness means, otherwise, it's only potential goodness. It's not actual goodness.
I thought you can't describe God as like anything, even like.
Okay, first of all, notice that you've shifted ground to an entirely different subject. That's fine. I don't mind. But let's register that you've pursued a certain line of questioning, and now you've abandoned that line of questioning. I like to keep track of where we are. I don't like to just shift around on the map without knowing where we are. Fine. Good. So now.
So I'm leaving that to hold because I feel like something else is.
So the answer to that question is that there are different levels in God's existence, so to speak. And there's an ultimate level that we don't describe at all, in any way whatsoever. And one or two levels down, where we can start to describe anything at all, that's a level in which there's absolute perfection, which includes absolute goodness.
Okay, well, let's keep that to a pause for now then, all right?
In other words, when you have contradictions, the medievals used to say, when you're facing a contradiction, make a distinction. So if you have contradictions about God, what's traditionally done is you separate out levels. You say, on one level we talk like this, and another level we talk like that. This table is solid, right? But you know that it's more than 99% empty space.
Yeah.
Are you serious that it's solid? What do you mean by solid? So here's the answer. One thing that solid means is chock full of stuff. Nothing's like that, except maybe an electron. The table isn't chock full of stuff. It's almost all empty space. Another meaning of solid is it's impenetrable. When I bang my hand on the table, it doesn't go in like in water. It's not. So in that sense, it's solid. What we've discovered is solidity is almost all empty space. Surprise, surprise. So on one level, I talk about it solid when I talk about how it behaves in my world. Talk about it empty space. I'm talking about the atomic level. It's a different level. And both are true.
Okay.
So talk about God can be split up between different levels. And on different levels, we say different things. That's all true. Just have to divide the levels. That's all.
I'll think about this for now.
Okay, yeah.
Couple questions. What would be Torah Lishma, studying Torah Lishma? What would be a definition of Chakal, Tapuchim, Gadishim? And also the three things that are perpetuating as the sins that eliminated us or that destroyed the temple.
Excuse me.
Eliorias, Avodah Zarah, and
Shvichus Damim.
Well, how are they perpetuating themselves to this day if that is the explanation that they're perpetuating themselves and that we're causing those things to happen? What would be like an example of how we're doing that?
Okay, I'll answer the first and the third. The second one is strictly Kabbalistic, and I'm not going to answer it. The third is just based on a mistake. The three transgressions that you describe are attributed to the fall of the first temple. The first temple. The second temple was destroyed because of causeless hatred. Sinas chinam. Sorry?
Okay.
Sinas chinam. Causeless hatred. So we don't have to worry about those three perpetuating themselves.
Okay.
And indeed, Prophet Jeremiah says, no one knows why the temple was destroyed. Ask the sages, he says, and ask the other prophets if they know. Nobody knows. And then he reveals, and he says, Al ozvam Torasi, because they abandoned my Torah. And there's a whole literature on that. So maybe the three were contributory, and the one that broke the camel's back was abandoning the Torah. At any rate, what's at work today is causeless hatred, and that's what has to be opposed and rectified. And everybody says if that would be rectified, then the temple would be rebuilt.
Or can I change my question to that? How is that?
Well, I mean, that's pretty easy, right? It's pretty obvious that people have hatred for other people. That is certainly causeless. In our camp, people have competition between various different groups and their different emphases and priorities in serving God. And too often they're prepared to say, the other guy's just out. Because he doesn't agree with me, he's a throwaway. Instead of saying there are different ways to approach God, and different things have to be emphasized, and we have to recognize difference, like the original 12 tribes had different dynamics. Each tribe had different dynamics. The Arizal said they had different Sidurim. Their order of prayer was different. They had a different dynamic in their relationship with God. So that's not too difficult. Now, the first one that you asked about was?
Torah Lishma.
Torah Lishma. Lishma, the word Lishma, I'm quoting the Rambam now. There's a lot of misinformation about this. Lishma means doing any mitzvah. Lishma applies to every mitzvah. Lishma means doing a mitzvah out of love for the Creator who commanded it. Out of love for the Creator who commanded it. That's in chapter 10 of the Laws of Repentance by Maimonides. And that means that God commanded me to do it, and I recognize that He's the ultimate reality. He is the source of all that's valuable, good, pure, appropriate, just, productive, contributing to the perfection of the world, and that's why I do it. Now, what would that mean in practice? This is an undiscussed subject in many areas. I have a couple of suggestions, but I think you should ask this of other people as well. They may know of applications that I'm not aware of, and it's a very important, far-reaching question. What does it mean to do Torah Lishma? One thing is to try to reduce the ego that's invested in the study of Torah. Here's an example. You and your charusi, your study partner, are studying a difficult passage, and you're tied up in knots. And you say, fine, we'll come back to it tomorrow. You go home, wherever you go, and you're thinking it over, and suddenly the answer hits you. It hits you. It's obvious. You come in the next day and say, wow, listen, I've got it, here it is. Yeah, you've got it. You're terrific. You're wonderful. How about saying instead, I was thinking it over last night, and I remembered something that someone told me 2 years ago, and I think that would do the job. Then it's not yours. You didn't take credit for it. It's more a mitzvah to serve God than a vehicle to build yourself up, to make yourself more successful or get yourself more respect. Another example.
You're saying that you played it like you didn't think of it yourself?
That's right.
Okay.
That's right. And it is permissible to lie in these circumstances. It's permissible to lie in these circumstances. Another example. It's an unwritten rule in yeshivas that if you're stuck, you can stop anybody else and ask them for help. Some yeshivas pay people to be there all the time just to answer questions. But sometimes they're busy because other people are asking questions. You can stop any advanced student at any time and ask him for help. The unwritten rule is he's got to stop and help you. Now, that advanced student, how does he feel about helping you? There are two options. Maybe there are more, but there are two for my purposes. One is, oh, nuts! Here he is again asking me how to read that Rashi. I'm in the middle of Rabbi Kiva Eger, which is very taxing, very difficult. I've invested 20 minutes studying myself in organizing the ideas of my mind, and he wants me to read this Rashi. But I have to do it. I have to do it. God commanded it, and I'm going to do it. I'm going to put a smile on my face, and I'm going to do it because I have to do it. The other way to do it is to say, what am I doing here? Conquering intellectual worlds? Inventing new, brilliant ideas? I'm supposed to be serving God. This is what God wants me to do right now. I should welcome the question of the beginner with the same enthusiasm that I am thrilled to learn a very sophisticated commentary, because all of it is serving God. To work on doing it that way is to do it because of love of the Creator who commanded me to do it, rather than having some selfish gain from it, to be a vehicle for selfish gain. Lishma means doing it as a mitzvah. Doing it because God commanded it, and because ultimately, Lishma means because I love the one who commanded it and I want to do what he wants me to do. That's what Lishma means. And it's very, very important, because Torah that's not Lishma is, I would say, spiritually crippled. It's worth doing. It's worth doing, and one hopes that one graduates from Shelo Lishma to Lishma. The Talmud promises that under certain circumstances, but one has to know that there's something to strive for. Instead of just doing it mechanically or with a heavy dose of ego, doing it in a way that's doing it as service of God. Okay.